Okay, well, I guess my story starts. I grew up in Minnesota and in Minneapolis area, and I was always very scientific and skeptical, and I still kind of am. I'm a computer guy by trade, so I've been in the computer business all my life, and I've worked on very highly technical stuff. And so the last thing I thought about doing was getting into out-of-body experiences, but I'll tell you how that all happened. Um, in 1979, my brother Joe bought a book called Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe, and he gave it to my dad as a present. Um, I forget, I forget for his, it might have been for his birthday because his birthday is in July. And I think this is in about July. And after my dad was done reading it, I thought, that's a fascinating subject. I had heard about astral projection kind of in passing in other places and thought, this is kind of interesting stuff and wonder if it's true and all of that. But I never gave it any serious consideration. So when my dad was done reading Journeys Out of the Body, I asked to borrow it and I read it and I was like blown away by it. And um, Robert Monroe had all of these crazy stories in the book about flying here and there out of his body and going through walls and basically acting like a ghost and being able to see things that he shouldn't be able to see and flying away from his body and things like that and just doing really weird stuff. And I thought, this guy is out of his mind. He's obviously, I don't know what his deal is, but he's obviously having very vivid dreams or something like that going on. And I didn't take it very seriously, but Monroe didn't say to believe him. He basically said, try it for yourself. And he gives a couple of procedures in the book for the reader to try to induce an out-of-body experience. Well, the key to science is repeatability. So I thought, okay, that's the first thing that a scientist wants is the ability to recreate an experiment and verify results of other scientists have reported things. And Monroe's book didn't come off as a crazy person. It came off as a very scientific guy of, well, this is what happened to me, as weird as it was. And so I thought, I'll give Monroe the benefit of the doubt and I'll try his technique. And I don't seriously think that anything's going to happen, but, I'll give it a try and I'll at least be open-minded because if science is anything, it should be open-minded. Because there's still, we're learning new things every day, right? Science is discovering new things every day that they didn't know. And so I gave Monroe's method a try. And Monroe's method, I've got explanations of it in various places, and I don't know if I was reading into his method or if I was interpreting it correctly, but what I did is I started relaxing my physical body and calming my mind to a point of absolute zero where no thoughts were occurring, no emotions were occurring, and basically narrowing my mind down to a single strand of thought. And then I started doing this visualization that Monroe recommended, which had to do with 2 lines of force. And so these lines of force were coming out from the sides of my temples and coming out like 1 foot in front of me, in front of my eyebrows. And then he had me hold that for a while and then extend it further out till it's 3 feet and then further out till it's 6 feet. And you don't move on until you can actually see that visualization, perfectly clear. And then what happens after 9 feet is you start to widen the angle out. So you're pushing the lines away from your temples and you're pulling it back over your head, or at least that's what I did. And then something very strange happened to me, and it was a pivotal point in my life, and that is I felt this twang, and it was a very strange sensation. It was like a twang inside my head. And I thought, okay, maybe this isn't such a good idea. I'm in over my head, right? So I got a little scared. So I decided to try and back out of it and retract my lines of force. But what happened is these imaginary lines of force seemed as if they became real. And as crazy as that sounds, when I retracted them into myself, it's like it brought with them a vibration, and they call it the vibrations in out of body or astral projection lingo. These vibrations basically swept over me. I noticed I could see through my closed eyelids, and I saw this blue ring of fire that was about this big, and it was kind of coming toward me, and it kind of enveloped me and passed over me. And I found myself paralyzed. I was in sleep paralysis, couldn't move my body. So I really started to panic at that point. Started wildly thrashing and kicking and trying to regain control of my physical body. And eventually I did. I regained control of my body, and I was very scared. It was probably the scariest thing that had ever happened to me, because these vibrations felt very electrical. They felt like I was being electrocuted, literally. And so finally I calmed down and managed to get to sleep. But at that point, I knew I was basically hooked. As a scientist, or at least a scientific kind of guy, I knew I had to investigate further and find out for myself if Monroe was really lying, or any, if that much was true, excuse me, how much more of it was true. And so I knew I had to figure out, I needed to induce more of these out-of-body experiences and explore the state myself, so I could see it firsthand what was going on. And after that, I tried for about a month to induce an out-of-body experience. Monroe's method never worked for me a second time. And so I started reading other books and collecting other books on out-of-body experience and astral projection. And I've kept up at it. And eventually I had I had a very strange first out-of-body experience, which was more than just this run-in with the vibrations. And it was the whole 9 yards. It was the weightlessness and coming out of my body and floating up to the ceiling and all of this. And it was like, well, this breaks all the rules. I mean, it breaks the rules of physics, because physics teaches that there is no non-physical anything, right? And at the same time, I was kind of religious back then. I was a Catholic, and that kind of breaks all of those rules too. It's like I believed in earthly life and heavenly life after you die, but nothing like leaving your body while you're alive. So it kind of really sent me into a crisis of belief, both my scientific beliefs and my religious beliefs. And
when after it wasn't happening again, after using Monroe's method, did you have like a certain level of doubt that it actually happened?
Oh no! This was
okay.
the most real thing that had ever happened to me. It was just incredibly real. It was scary real. There was no doubt in my mind that it was real. And so anyway, I started collecting all these books on astral projection, and I still do collect books on astral projection. Back then, in the 1979, 1980s, there were very few books on out-of-body experience, and I collected all of them, which was, all 10 of them or something. There weren't very many. Now I've got a collection of almost 200. Actually, I've got more than 200 books on the subject, and that's just books on out-of-body experience and astral projection. That does not include peripheral topics like near-death experience or lucid dreaming or other altered states of consciousness. That's just out-of-body books. And I still study and practice it whenever I can. I've had many countless out-of-body experiences. I kind of lost count. And but I've been doing this for more than 40 years now. And it's just always been a fascination of mine. It's as thrilling now as it is as it ever was, at the beginning. So it's just it's an incredible experience, and it's life-changing, or at least it was for me.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. So when you initially got into Monroe's, or the way that you tried it the very first time, did you go into that with were you like already on a path of some sort of spirituality? Were you had it in your head already of this idea, or were you coming at it completely from as close to unbiased like standpoint as possible?
No, I really didn't believe Monroe. I didn't believe a word he said. And I did not come from any spiritual tradition other than I said I was Catholic. So I grew up Catholic and went to church on Sundays. What that meant is I went to church on Sundays and the rest of the week I forgot everything about it and basically lived a computer. I was a computer guy, right? I was going to high school and in '79, and that's when I graduated and started going to the University of Minnesota as a computer scientist. And I took summer classes in computers. So my whole life was geared around computers. That was the love of my life, if you will. And I'm still in computers. I still am a very technical computer guy. I've been working for Red Hat, which is one of the technology leaders. They're the world's biggest supplier of Linux software. And
cool.
I work on the Linux kernel, which is no small feat. It's very complex code. So I'm a very scientific guy. So by all means, I was not prepared for out-of-body experience to be like this or to take me where it has. It was just completely unexpected.
Yeah.
So I have a question as far as like biologically in our brains, what happens while you're experiencing an OBE? Do you know much about that? Like what kind of like neuron connectivity happens? And
yes, well, I've done a lot of studying of that, and I've always been, because I've been a scientific guy, that's always been a curiosity of mine. First of all, I have written 5 books, and my latest book is, let me grab it here. My latest book is Hacking the Out-of-Body Experience, and the subtitle is Leveraging Science to Induce OBEs. And what that is it's a culmination of the studies that I've made on out-of-body experience and the brain, what happens to the body, what happens to the brain. And the bottom line is, from a science point of view, there just hasn't been enough studies done. We need serious scientists to study the phenomenon. There have been a few studies. Charles Tart did some studies on Robert Monroe and other people using EEGs, electroencephalograms. And what he found is that during an OBE, at least according to Tart, there are no rapid eye movements. So it apparently is not in the dream state. He said that your brain waves are not delta like they are normally during the dream state, but more typically theta. And so it's kind of like a halfway point between waking and sleeping. But the problem is, when Tart was doing these studies on the brain, it was many, many years ago. So there isn't much contemporary data.
Sure.
Now, there have been some studies. There was a couple of, there was a paper written by a Japanese guy a scientist, and they took a guy who could create out-of-body experiences at will, and he was a master at a specific type of meditation, and it takes you an entire lifetime to learn their technique, and so it's not something you can pick up overnight. And anyways, he could do this anytime he wanted, and they hooked him up to some more modern equipment, not the EEG equipment, but they used near-infrared spectrography and stuff like that. Anyway, what they did is they measured the blood flow to the brain in various places. And now that can't tell you what is going on deep inside the brain, but it can tell you what's going on near the surface. And what they found is that during an out-of-body experience, there's a profound drop of activity in the prefrontal cortex. And what that is it's very similar, in fact, to other profound states of consciousness. And other scientists have studied like the effects of psilocybin on the brain. For example, the main hallucinogenic ingredient in magic mushrooms. They give somebody psilocybin and they monitor their brain for the same kind of activity. And what they find is the same thing. They find an acute and rapid drop in electrical activity, like falling off the shelf from the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And so it's like the the harder you trip, the greater the difference is when this fall happens. But they've also done all kinds of different studies on sleep, what happens during sleep, and there are various areas of the brain that are all connected to one another, and it's all very complex. There's a thing called the default mode network of the brain, and what that is that scientists have discovered that when you're working on a specific external task, like I'm doing a math problem, for example, that uses a specific region, a set of regions, hubs in the brain, called the task positive network, the TPN. And when your mind goes idle, you're using this default mode network, which is another set of hubs. So when your brain goes idle, it's like certain areas of your brain light up, and when you focus on something, another set of items light up in your brain. And the default mode network is the idle part, and that consists of areas in the prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex, and then the angular gyrus or whatever you want to say in the back of the behind the ear. And that's an interesting thing because in the past scientists have found that they could induce symptoms similar to out-of-body experience just by changing the electrical activity in that part of the brain. So anyway, it's all very complex and interrelated. But like when you fall asleep, what happens is you have some of the nodes in the default mode network stay active and alive, and they're communicating with one another, but others go dormant basically, and the regions are cut off from the others during sleep. And the same with sedation, when you're sedated, put under for surgeries or whatever. And during an out-of-body experience, what I believe happens, and I don't have scientific evidence to prove this, but it almost seems as if those regions are active when they normally wouldn't be. So anyway, it all gets very complex.
So what do you, is there, when you're specifically talking about out-of-body experiences, how do you relate those to things like remote viewing and, like you said before, like near-death experience and things like that? Is there a difference in how you view those, or is it just a matter of how you get to that point?
Yeah, there's a very complex nomenclature. It's all very confusing. There's a lot of terms out there. Some people want to call it soul travel. Some people want to call it astral projection. Some people want to call it out-of-body experience. But the way I think of it is this. I think of remote viewing is where I am conscious and aware of my physical body. So I'm in my physical body, my awareness is in my physical body, but I'm getting ideas, impressions, ESP, whatever you want to call it. I'm getting physical, I'm getting visual things, visual imagination, if you will, of another spot, another place on the earth or wherever it happens to be. But my conscious awareness still remains firmly anchored in my physical body. And it doesn't take much to do remote viewing. It takes a little bit of practice and some protocols and things like that. But it's really pretty easy, calming your mind and all of that, but you're actually not leaving the body. Leaving the body or inducing an out-of-body experience is much more difficult to achieve. And the way that I think of near-death experiences is that a near-death experience has a bunch of features, and an out-of-body experience is just one of those features that can occur during a near-death experience. Near-death experience, typically you'll see dead relatives. A lot of times, a lot of people will see dead relatives. They will report having a past life review where their life flashes before their eyes, and they recall every single thing that's happened in their life, things like that. And those things typically don't happen in an out-of-body experience, although sometimes it seems to happen that way. Some people have reported seeing dead relatives or whatever, but you don't typically see that tunnel of light and all of that same stuff. So yeah, what makes it more confusing is that you have some people like Robert Monroe, in his later books, he wrote 3 books, Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and Ultimate Journey. And in the last 2 books, he stopped really talking about out-of-body experience, and he started using terms like focus levels. And that's another set of terms to toss into the ring too. And these focus levels are more what I think of as more like remote viewing. Although some people seem to be getting very realistic impressions from those. And so anyway, but in my opinion, like the focus level things are a little bit different from your typical out-of-body experience, because again, you still have an awareness of your physical body.
Yeah.
When I'm in an out-of-body experience, my physical body is just another inanimate object in the room. It's just a blob lying on the bed. To me, it looks like a blob of energy. I don't even see the body. It's more like I'm seeing a blob of energy lying on the bed.
Is that just with your body, or do you see a lot of things like that?
No, typically everything else looks pretty normal to me. A lot of times, though, during an OBE, I can see it appears, strange things can appear, like, it looks kind of cloudy and fuzzy, like there are clouds sitting around in your bedroom or whatever, or kitchen or wherever you happen to be. So it's not always, and some people say that it depends on your level of consciousness, right? If you have a very bright level of consciousness, then you're not going to see those clouds. And other people describe those cloudy environments as being more of a lower plane of existence and all of that. I'm not sure if I buy into planes of existence. To me, it's all just conscious awareness. And so it's all, it's all your interpretation.
So that's kind of my question. And I don't mean to make this too complicated too quickly, but when going back to like the near-death experience in relation to an out-of-body experience or astral projection, so you're kind of saying that in your opinion, it's like out-of-body experiences could be part of a near-death experience, but a near-death experience might entail like a little bit more. And if that's the case, is it would it be a thing that we're looking at 2 different dimensions of something, or just when you're in, like, how would we communicate with things that are within the realm of a near-death experience if you're astral projecting, or if you're doing a normal out-of-body experience, or can they kind of coexist?
Well, like I said, in a near-death experience, a lot of people go to this out-of-body experience. They have an out-of-body experience as part of their near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people, it's the same thing. It's the same exact experience. They can see, others and interact with them and whatever, like you can in an out-of-body experience. And in OBE, you can see people and talk to people and whatever. And I mean, it's fascinating, and everyone who's had one, goes through a certain set of experiments that they try of, this and that. But like, you can tell when you're interacting with somebody who's in the body. Like if I fly to my brother's house and I see him or whatever and try to talk to him, if he's awake and in the body, I'll be able to see him that way, but he will, to me, appear distracted. He won't look at me and engage me. I can talk to him, but it's more like talking to his subconscious. Mm-hmm. And he would act as if I'm a inconvenience. So he would be, he would answer questions, but kind of not real talkative and all of that. In the body, people appear very distracted. If I see somebody who is not acting distracted and they look at me and engage with me in conversation and it's more one-on-one, then it's, probably a non-physical person, whether you want to call that a ghost or, somebody else having an out-of-body experience or whatever that is. But that's not your typical in-the-body person. And then there are these other beings that I call the invisible helpers, which is really it sounds really bizarre. But basically, it seems as if there are helpers out there that I can never see, but I can hear them. So I can ask for assistance, for example, of, I'm having trouble here, I'm stuck on this, can you give me a hand here? And I can hear somebody saying, oh, sure, we'll help you out or whatever. And somebody will I'll feel somebody take my hand, but I never see these people, which is really kind of strange. They're usually very helpful, but they're not talkative. If I try to engage them in conversation, they avoid the conversation. They'll put you off and they'll say, well, we're not here to talk or something like that, you know. So it's fascinating anyway.
Wow. As far as like these entities that you've met, or no, actually, let me start with the timeline thing. In your experience, or have you met anybody, or have you personally known anyone that's able to do the astral projection, but be in a position that's either forward or backwards in time from the present? Because when you were relating, or when you related kind of remote viewing and astral projection, or maybe, you know, possibly being one and the same, or people can kind of do both things, or it's fairly easy to remote view. You know, the CIA did testing with remote viewing a lot over like spanning like 2 or 3 decades. And one thing is they were asking a person to go back like 1 million years in time. Mm-hmm. And he, you know, regardless of whether or not the story, his account of it was true, he said that he experienced this thing and saw all these things. So would it be possible for a person in an out-of-body space to be able to do the same thing, go back or forward in time?
You know, I believe that it can happen. I'm still a very scientific guy, and so I still am very skeptical about such claims, but I actually did have one out-of-body experience that was considered a time travel out-of-body. And so if you wanted to go back 1 million years, I don't know how the heck you would do that. But what happened to me, I'll just explain what happened to me, and I've only had the one. One time I left my physical body and I was contemplating what I should do. And I saw this kind of a square doorway or a rectangular doorway, like that was black, and it kind of like appeared in front of me. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. And I was kind of floating there in midair and looking at this portal. And I heard a disembodied voice, probably one of these helpers I talked about. And he said, come on, let's go. And I said, where am I going? And he said, to the year, whatever. And he rattled off the year. I figured it was 2048 or something like that. I've got I have it on my blog anyway, one of my first blog entries.
Which I absolutely enjoy, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I've read a bunch of it, and it's great.
It's awesome.
Great, thank you. I've been doing this blog for 8 years now, which is amazing to me to think that I've been doing it 8 years. Like, wow. But anyway, so this guy, this helper said, well, let's go. And I said, okay. And basically I felt pulled through this doorway and I found myself flying above the earth. And I thought, whoa. And I flew way down and landed on the ground. And I didn't recognize anything. It was just city everywhere. And I thought, well, I'm not going to make any progress this way. So I thought, well, I want to go to some place I would recognize. And I decided on my childhood home where I grew up, and in Northeast Minneapolis. So I found myself near where my childhood home was in Northeast Minneapolis. And I started walking toward Central Avenue, which is, one of the roads coming out of downtown. It was only a block away from my house, and everything was really strange. So this apparently was supposed to be the future. And what I noticed is very strange anomalies. There weren't any roads to speak of. There were no cars anywhere. I didn't see a single car. I saw this strange, like a pedestrian overpass over what appeared to be like a small, like a mini freeway. And it almost seemed like it was a tiny freeway that was geared for individual vehicles, like really, really small individual people. Like instead of getting in a car, you'd get inside a pod and it would zip you from one place to another rapidly or something like that. But I didn't see any cars or anything like that. Just this strange overpass. And what was strange is that there were very, very few people. I expected Minneapolis in that year to be crowded with people because, populations grow. And what I saw was very, very few people. I saw one, a person here, a person there. But I thought, this is really odd. And I thought, I should try and find something that would validate what year it is. So I went inside a shop looking around for something that would have a year on it and searching. And I eventually saw a couple people there and stuff like that, but and one of them seemed to be a psychic and was giving a psychic reading to another person. But she appeared to be able to see me, and which was really kind of strange too. But anyway, I thought it was very odd that there were very few people. And at the time I had read, I was reading a book by Bruce Moen, who was an aficionado of the Monroe Institute, which was started by Robert Monroe. And in Bruce Moen's book, he was saying that he was doing some of these focus level experiments, and he did lots of it. He wrote a whole series of books, and they're very good books, by the way. But in one of his books, he mentioned that he thought there would be a major crisis of health, a pandemic that would like annihilate most of the world's population. And so it's a little bit alarming that we're in the middle of a pandemic here. Although this pandemic has not had nearly the effect of wiping out like 90% of the Earth's population by a long shot. But, anyway, that was, something that I had read in Bruce Moen's book. And so maybe that affected my subconscious, and that affected the experience that I saw very few people there. So who knows? But that's my only direct experience with time travel in an OBE.
I'm curious as to what the timeline was like from you experiencing it compared to how much actual time passed.
Oh, you mean the time is a minute in real time the same as a minute in an OBE?
Yeah.
That seems kind of variable.
Okay.
Some people report, I've read almost all of these 200 books, some odd books. Some people claim that time passes very quickly. You can experience a long OBE and only a few minutes of real time have passed. For me, it's been almost 1-to-1. So a minute of OBE time seems to be about a minute of regular time. So I haven't noticed a big time discrepancy. Although I did have a childhood experience that I wrote in my first book, in which I seemed to, it was kind of weird. The childhood experience, my friend and I were young teenagers, and we always played wrestling. And my friend was a real strong guy, so we decided as an experiment he'd give me a bear hug until I passed out, and then I could tell him what happened. Kids do. Kids get in trouble, boys especially. Yeah. And so anyway, I agreed to this. It was actually three of us. It was me and Frank and Eric, and Frank was the strong one. And so I agreed, and I was the experimental one. So I agreed to have Frank give me a bear hug until I passed out. And what it was like during that experience is it was like I had completely lost touch with Earth. It was like I had completely, it was like waking up. It was like waking up in a different place, and Earth was just a distant memory of something that I had done a long time ago. And it seemed like I was in this other alternate reality, alternate physical universe for like over 100 years. It seemed like I was gone forever. And so long that I had completely forgotten all of Earth. And it was just like a silly dream I had had a long time ago. And then all of a sudden I was walking to a store and I passed out. I lost consciousness or whatever. And I opened my eyes, and here I am back on Earth. And I'm on the grass, and I'm looking above me. It's like, where the heck am I? I have no clue where I'm at. And here's my friend Frank and Eric, and they were looking down at me, and it's like, what'd you see? What'd you see? And to me, it was like, I was like, how long was I out? And they said just a few minutes. So wow. To me, it seemed like I was gone for hundreds of years. And it was just incredible. And they asked me, well, what happened? And it's like, at that point, I knew they would never believe me. So I said nothing happened.
That's so. Like, I've experienced like pretty intense mushroom trips before, and been caught in these experiences where it just seems like you're in a place for hours, years, days, weeks, and it's been moments, which is a pretty insane, pretty interesting feeling. Mm-hmm. So you have the ability, or you're practiced enough to be able to astral project or go into an out-of-body experience almost like when you plan to, right? Or can you do that? Or is that something that people generally can do?
Well, it doesn't always work. When I lie down and the conditions are right and it's quiet and it's dark and if I set my mind to it, yes, I can almost always get out of body. But it's never ideal, right? I mean, the dog comes in and wakes me up, or you know, my wife or whatever. I've got a wife now, and so life is different. I work a full-time job in the computer industry and all these things. So the bottom line is I don't get a lot of time to practice. When I really set my mind up to do it, and I usually can achieve it. And I found there's a whole bunch of things that certainly help. And meditation is one of them. If I keep up a regular meditation practice, that helps. But there's also a whole bunch of different things that help the would-be out-of-body experiencer. Scientists have done a bunch of different studies on out-of-body experience, and they found, like, for example, people who play a lot of video games tend to have more OBEs than people who don't play video games. So one thing that you can do, for example, is play video games. And the reason that is because your brain concocts, I mean, even in waking life or in an OBE or whatever you experience, your brain concocts a story of experience, what I call a story of experience. And it bases that on your 5 physical senses, but mostly the sense of sight and sound, and also like your imagination and other things, your belief system and all of that. So what you can do to induce an out-of-body experience is you have to relax your body completely to the point where your temporal parietal junction, which is the area of the brain that decides these things, so you relax it to the point where it doesn't have enough data to actually say, I'm here, I'm lying in bed, I'm doing anything. And so you deprive it of that information, and then you have to feed it with false information. Basically, you try and fool your brain into thinking that you're moving when you're not moving, and things like that. And that's how you induce an out-of-body experience, is when you can, basically, you have to use your imagination, whether it's visual imagination, visualizations, or tactile imagination, like grabbing onto a rope and feeling the rope in your hands, or whether it's hearing or whatever. But using your imagination to fool your brain, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to derail that stream of consciousness. You got this story of experience, what I called, and that's created by the TPJ. So you starve the TPJ of its sense data, and you feed it with artificial sense data from your imagination to get it knocked off the tracks. And once you've knocked it off the tracks, then you're in a full-fledged out-of-body experience. And from there, you know, you drop the visualizations, you drop the imagination, you basically are experiencing it firsthand, but you've tricked your body into letting go of that stream of consciousness and adapting this other one.
Yeah.
Wow. And so is there, because sleep and OBEs are closely related. And so is there any times when you go straight from an OBE into sleep and then you wake up?
Yeah, so sometimes, yeah, a lot of times what happens is, well, when I have an out of body, and a lot of people I know, when they have an out of body, they don't want to quit, right? It's fun. You're walking through walls, you're having the time of your life, you're defying gravity and whatever, you're exploring. And so it's a lot of fun. So nobody consciously chooses to stop an OBE, or at least, well, I suppose you can if you get scared or whatever. But typically for me, I don't choose to end an OBE. So it's basically as long as I can hold on to a consciousness, and eventually I black out. Now, after I black out, what happens is my body will either start dreaming, and I'll go into a brief dream state, which is usually just a few minutes, and then I'll wake up from that, or else I'll just black out and immediately come back to my body. There's also sometimes a blackout at the very beginning of the OBE as well as the end. But I have had OBEs in which I've consciously been able to witness the entire process from start to finish. In other words, no blackouts at all. I've been able to go from complete bodily consciousness all the way into full-fledged out of body, and all the way back where there was no break in consciousness whatsoever, no dream state, no blackout, no nothing. But typically you'll have some of those things, or most people will anyway.
Okay, because when my one experience with an OBE, it was right when I was on the verge of falling asleep one night,
Mhm.
and I had spent the whole day writing. I was writing a script for a short film,
Mhm.
and my short film was about near-death experiences. So I was already doing a bunch of research into it, and that kind of happened to me, is where I felt myself come out of my body, and I was floating around, and then all of a sudden it felt like I was in a dream, and I woke up.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times what happens is you lose consciousness and it just degrades into a dream. And that's something that I talked about in my very first book. I wrote a book uh, called Out of Body Experiences, How to Have Them and What to Expect. And that book is now well, it was published in 1997, so it's more than 20 years old now. So 23 years old. Um, but in that book, I talked about something that I called the fantasy trap. And what that is if you are in an out of body experience and you start to fantasize about something, or you play what if about something, there's a very good chance that it's going to suck you into a dream state, and that's a bad thing. You don't want to, get pulled into a dream state. But like if I'm in an OBE and I see something unusual, like there's a rose or something like that, something in my garden that gets my attention, and I start thinking about, well, that's strange. How did I come up with? And I start almost daydreaming. That'll suck me into a dream real fast. So what you have to do is you have to maintain focus. OBEs require a lot of focus, and that's a big problem.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And in mine, there was a bottle on the table, and I knew it wasn't there before. It was a Gatorade bottle, and I hadn't drinking Gatorade in a long time, and then I woke up, and yeah, it wasn't there. But
Yeah, and some people, that brings up another point. Some people, a lot of people notice that the things they see in an OBE don't always correspond one-to-one with the physical world. It's almost as if they're seeing an echo of the physical world and not the real thing. And a lot of people think that what you're actually seeing in an OBE is kind of the pre-planning state of the physical world, or shadow memories of the physical world or something. I know this is true of William Buhlman, who wrote a number of books. Adventures Beyond the Body is a popular book, and it's a very good book. And Buhlman, one of the things he told me is that he was in a house one time. He's moved several times in his life, but he was in a house where he was building him and his wife were remodeling a chimney. They were having a fireplace being remodeled, and they put a new face on it and everything. And they had a bunch of contractors that wanted to do the work, and they had hired them to do the work. And in his OBEs, he could see this area of his room developing before it actually did. And so what he was actually seeing is he was seeing, the room before it actually became that way. And eventually the physical world caught up to what he was seeing in his OBEs. So some people want to say that, that the out of body state or the astral plane, if some people believe in an astral plane, that the astral plane is like building blocks for physical reality. The astral world, things manifest much more quickly. But if you manifest things there habitually and everything, then they will become manifest in the physical world as well. So there's kind of this relationship between the two, but it's not one-to-one. I've noticed discrepancies in my own OBEs between the physical world and the astral one or non-physical one. And it's always fascinating to me. But anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of theories about that.
that's super fascinating.
So I did have a question about that, and that's
Yeah.
when you get into this different, I'm going to call it just like a different dimension or just like a different way to see things around you.
Mhm.
When you have these experiences, is the environment that you're in,
Mhm.
is it different than the environment that you last were conscious in your body in? And if it is different, if there's things like, I've heard, read stories about like portals that people can open up or different things like this, or structures that may or may not, be near you in the present time. Do you manifest your consciousness into the same location every time? Like, will you come into that experience and be like, okay, this is a familiar surrounding, or do you go into it every time and I'm like, this is new for me?
It depends on. When I leave the body, a lot of times I am consciously aware of my own bedroom and the bedroom I'm sleeping, or if I happen to be on the couch or whatever, in the recliner or whatever, I'll be aware of that and I'll be in that environment immediately. But a lot of times I'll just wake up out of body to find myself in unfamiliar surroundings. And I mean, some people, talk about the astral plane or whatever. And my question is, how do you know it's the astral plane? Why do you call it that? Because to me, it's more like I wake up out of body. I know I'm out of body, and I'm just in unfamiliar surroundings. Like I'm in the middle of a city and I have no idea where I'm at, or in fact in space. For example, I've had an OBE once in which I like to experiment. One time I did an experiment where I was trying to contact God directly, right? This whole concept of a creator. And so I tried to go to God. And instead, what I found is I was transported to this place. I was like deep in space. There were no stars, planets, or anything anywhere nearby. I could see stars as pinpoints of light far off in the distance, but it's like, where the heck am I? I have no clue where I'm at. But it's like, so yeah, I mean, it can be both familiar and unfamiliar surroundings. But like if I leave my body in my bedroom and I stay in that physical environment, like if I go outside, my outside will look like my normal outside, for example, and all of that. So it's you can do both.
And just out of curiosity, can you manifest things inside of, like when you're having an out-of-body experience, can you create like a portal to somewhere else, or can you create some sort of object or thing for you while you're experiencing that?
Some people claim to be able to do that, but I've always had a difficult time manifesting things like that. One thing I can say is there's a phenomenon called lucid dreaming, and that's where you're dreaming and you're completely aware and awake, and you're aware that you're dreaming. You know you're dreaming, and you're in a dream world, which is in fact a hallucination. It's a self-created hallucination, right? And when you're in a lucid dream, you can manifest things. You can say, oh, I'm going to see a door now, and you can see a door. And then you can say to yourself, well, I know, I firmly believe that when I open this door, there's going to be a beautiful girl on the other side of it. So you open the door and there's a beautiful girl on the other side. So you can do things like that in a lucid dream. In an out-of-body experience, it's not that fluid, at least in my experience. It's much more static. It seems like it has a mind and will of its own. The world I experience out there, out of body, seems to have an independent reality to it. So I can't just manufacture a sword in midair and decide to use it or whatever. It's more like I'm going places, seeing things, and I have very little control, unlike a lucid dream. So a lot of people think that lucid dreaming and OBEs are the same thing, but in my experience, OBEs are much different. I've got another article in my blog that explains all the differences that I've encountered and found. And it's not just me. There are other, like lucid dreaming expert Robert Wagner said that they're different. Many people have agreed with me on that, that they seem to be two different things. So anyway, yeah, it's a fascinating thing. But no, I've never been able to directly manifest something. And even, hoping, that like trying to fly, I've had problems trying to fly. Which is easy in a lucid dream, and it's possible in an OBE as well. But it takes some practice and it takes some knowledge, and it's definitely more easy to just pull yourself to a distant location than it is to fly. But in my first book, I give several stories about how, falling flat on my face, believing that, oh, I can do this, and like a lucid dream or whatever, I can do this. I can just take a running start and fly in midair and this is an OBE and I know I'm weightless and all this, I'll give myself affirmations, and I'll take a running leap and I'll just fall flat on my face. And it's like, God, this is embarrassing, So yeah, it seems to have a life of its own.
Do you go into it with a plan as to if there's something you want to explore, if there's something you want to try, or do you generally just try to get into the experience and then go from there?
It's always better to have a plan. I usually have a long list of things that I want to accomplish during an OBE, and a lot of times I don't accomplish them, or because the problem is most OBEs are very short-lived. A lot of times they're only just a few seconds or minutes. So it's always better to go into it with a plan of what to do. And the reason is not just because they're short-lived, but because people, for some strange reasons, seem to be very ADD, right? They are attention deficit disorder during an OBE. So if, I've had many, many OBEs in which I see something unusual, and it's like, I was going to go try this experiment, but I see something unusual and that grabs my attention. It's like ADD, it's like squirrel, right? Something grabs my attention and then I have to investigate that. So a lot of times things, unless you plan things out very carefully, and I do recommend setting goals and setting plans, making plans, and then trying to act on them and not let this ADD get in your way, because it's very, very easy to get distracted in an OBE.
Yeah, man, that sounds really, yeah. It sounds really similar to like psilocybin experiences where you go in with like, it's important that you go in with a game plan, but then sometimes like just the smallest thing will just draw your attention away just so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard OBEs compared to psilocybin experiences before, and I've never tried psilocybin, but someday I'd like to, and see what people are talking about, because I do find it fascinating that there's a similar drop in the prefrontal cortex activity of the brain during both experiences. And I'm just hoping that there are more scientific experiments done where people can where scientists can study what's actually happening to the brain during an OBE, and we can actually try and figure out what's going on there, because it seems like we're connecting to something greater than ourselves. And if you look at evidence from like quantum physics, there have been a lot of strange things discovered in quantum physics lately in the last 10 years, 20 years. And it's incredible, but I think during an OBE, we're tapping into some stream of consciousness, and I'd like to figure out what that is. And I think that science can help us get us there.
Now, the military's probably definitely studied this before.
Oh, I'm sure they have.
Why don't we see that type of reporting, and what would they be using it for? Like, what do you think that, I know this is kind of a sidebar but what do you think that the military would be studying these things for? Because I know why they were studying like remote viewing, for instance, but do you think that there's anything that would be beneficial from having someone who could, create these out-of-body experiences pretty much at will?
Well, I think that there's more potential for remote viewing, and I think the military probably is using remote viewing actively. They've been doing it a very long time. If you look at some of the books by Joe McMoneagle and other these people that were involved in the early CIA stuff, they'll tell you that they're still actively using remote viewing. And I could believe there's a lot of potential for like finding missing children and finding Al-Qaeda leaders and things like that the military might be interested in. But I think remote viewing has a lot more potential for that than out of body. Out of body seems to be more of I don't know how to describe it, but it seems to be more a personal experience, if you will, than the remote viewing. So anyway, it's hard to explain, but I think remote viewing probably has more applications than OBEs do for that. OBEs are more of a personalized spiritual thing, at least they are for me, and a path to self-discovery and all of that. And I don't think the military is interested in self-discovery and all of those things. So.
Now, when you're in the when you're having an out of body experience and you're meeting other consciousnesses or other people or entities, are there things outside of just other people also having out of body experiences that you're meeting, communicating with, and maybe sharing experiences with? And where are those people like where is that existence like inside of all that?
I'm not quite sure
Well,
what you're getting at.
so
Are you talking about like visiting dead people, afterlife
well,
environments, things like that?
I don't know, because I've heard stories of people meeting other people that are having out of body experiences, and then people meeting entities, and they're not necessarily relating them to the, you know, to be the same thing. They're saying, okay, you know, I can meet Ryan if Ryan and I had out of body experience.
Oh,
But I
okay.
could
So like if we
also
were
see
having
like
one at the
another,
same time.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I've heard like that could be a thing, and then also that you might meet other just entities of different kinds.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely possible. And yeah, the trouble has always been OBEs are pretty hard to induce, and they're hard for me to induce. They've always been. I was not born with any natural talent. I have to work really hard to get them, and I don't know many people who can induce them at will. I know a few people who have them sporadically, but if I have them sporadically and they have them sporadically, the chances of us meeting are pretty low. I have had OBEs in which I've seen other people, but they've been in the body people. And I've seen other entities. I've seen these, like I can only describe them as, I think they're probably what most Christians would identify as an angel. It's basically a being of light. Basically, they look like a lantern filament. It's like a glowing, like a red, white hot glowing blob of energy or whatever. And I've seen these things and talked with them and things like that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential for that. I'd love to see more experiments done of that. And part of why I've written some of these books are to help other people explore the out-of-body state so that we can get to a point where we can study them better and do experiments like that.
Yeah. Ryan, did you see any entities or any people when you had your experience?
Negative. No, I saw my wife who was laying next to me in bed.
Yeah.
But it was kind of the same situation. I thought it was interesting how you brought up when you saw yourself, you were more of like a blob of energy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I remember too. I don't remember looking down and seeing distinct features.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was like you said, it was only a few minutes long, and I felt like for a while there I was doubting that I had the experience because of the whole bottle thing that I brought up and how it was
Right.
it was something that wasn't actually there. And so it kind of brings some relief when you're telling me that you can go from an OBE to a dream state. But no, I didn't see any entities when I was experiencing it.
Yeah. Sometimes an OBE, sometimes your consciousness is very thin and weak, and I'm barely holding on to consciousness. And other times I'm much more lucid and aware, and to the point where I sometimes I don't even realize I'm out of body. Right. For example, I had a couple of years ago. I spent the winter in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the winter of 2018. And I had an experience there where we were renting a small house near downtown, the old town, and it had a leaky roof, and it happened to be raining one day. And so we had all kinds of rain coming into the house. And so my wife and I put a bunch of buckets around the house to catch the drips coming off the roof. And the landlord was supposed to, she knew about the leaks and was going to get somebody to fix them and all of that. But on this particular occasion, I had an out-of-body experience, and basically I woke up, I sat up in bed, and it's like I'm feeling kind of tired, and I got up and walked, and it was pretty dark, so I kind of walked carefully because I knew my dog was at the end of the bed and everything, and I got down on my hands and knees to feel where she was so I wouldn't step on her, and I patted her furry belly and stuff like that. And I looked for the bucket that we'd placed, to catch the drips, and there was no bucket. And I thought, well, that's strange. It must have stopped raining, and my wife must have moved the bucket out of the room because it had stopped raining, and because she always goes to bed after me. And all of this. Well, eventually I got sucked back into my body, and it was only then that I had figured out that I had been out of body. It was so realistic that I had no clue I had been out of body. I thought I was in the body the whole time. And in fact, that bucket was still there, and it was still catching drips of water. And so this fact that the bucket wasn't there was very peculiar to me. But like I said, it seems like the out-of-body world is like an echo of the physical world, or vice versa. And the fact is, these four walls and the bed and the dressers and all of these ornaments of the bedroom were there for a very, very long time, right? Years. And this bucket had only been there for a couple hours. So the fact that this bucket hadn't imprinted enough on that non-physical reality. See? So anyway, it's all very curious. It's all very strange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Do you have a preferred method to induce an out-of-body experience?
I do. I've had many experiences, and I've used many different techniques, and I've designed a whole bunch of different techniques. But for me, what works best, and I think different people need different things, but for me, what works best is movement, a sense of movement. So what I try to do, and I've got one in my blog, I've got an explanation, and one of my articles I've got a video out there where I explain my technique, my favorite technique, the one that's most successful to me. But basically, my favorite technique is, first of all, again, I got to relax my body to the point where I can't even feel it. And then I start visualizing. And what I like to visualize, an object. And a lot of times I'll walk my consciousness down to the hypnagogic state, which is a pre-sleep state, and where my body is almost completely asleep, but my mind is still aware, but I start seeing things, seeing objects. And what I'll do is I'll have an object appear before me, and I'll, and this is normal, natural stuff, right? Everybody gets hypnagogic hallucinations right before they sleep. It's just that most of us aren't conscious when it happens, right? So I get these hypnagogic hallucination. So I'll see something, I'll see like a football. Let's just say I see a football, and I'll grab onto that football. I'll imagine that that's my football, and I basically take ownership of it in my mind. I think this is my football, and I'll try to like grab it and turn it and move it. And usually it'll pop, it'll disappear, it'll shatter into a million pieces. And then I'll wait for another object to come into view, and I'll take control of that one. And eventually, if I do this long enough, and a lot of times I'll find something that I can't take control of, like, a whole stadium full of people, for example, is too big. So that, if I see a stadium full of people, it's like, I'm not even going to try. So I just basically ignore it and wait for the next one. But I like octahedrons. I've got a crystal octahedron here. So I'll see that object in my hypnagogic hallucination, or I'll visualize one and try to make it real. And I'll imagine it spinning, and I'll try to take control of it. And I'll imagine it going forward and backward. And I'll try to follow my consciousness along with it. I'll try to develop a gravity between the object and me. And then I use that momentum to swing myself out of body. And it's kind of difficult to explain in just a couple minutes, but that's my favorite technique that I use. A lot of people use visualizations and other things, but for me, it's movement. It's imagined movement.
That's amazing. I've heard of reports of when people are coming out of their body, like a part of them still being attached, like their feet or like their waistline. How common is that with you?
Yeah, well, it used to happen a lot. A lot of people encountered that. They'll be free of their body except a foot will get stuck or whatever. It's like there's a gravity between your astral body and your physical body. And although some would say it's the etheric plane, I mean, they have all kinds of there's all kinds of occult lore about these things, right? They talk about etheric planes and astral planes and all of this and energy bodies and all of that. But you don't need to get all bogged down in that kind of thing. But it seems as if the physical body has kind of a gravitational pull on your astral body. So you have to gain enough momentum to get away from the body, or else it'll just suck you right back in. It's like one of these paddle balls, you know, where you got a paddle and with the ball with a string attached, and you're going like this to try and the ball goes out when you hit it, and then it comes snapped right back. Your body, your astral body wants to do that. It wants to get snapped back to your physical. So you have to make sure you have enough momentum to get out all the way. Yeah, it's a gravitational pull between your body, but yeah, it can, you know, grab onto you or whatever, and it's not easy sometimes to twist and turn and let go or whatever. That's another one of those traps. But again, the momentum helps. Trying to develop that sense of motion, that helps, because then you don't get bogged up in that thought of, you know, because if you spend enough time and you turn around and want to look at your body or touch your physical body or something like that, again, a lot of times you'll just get sucked back into it.
Wow. Are there any potential dangers when you're having an out-of-body experience?
None that I've encountered. And again, I've been doing this more than 40 years now. I've seen some scary stuff. I've seen, you know, people that were dirty and they looked like they wanted to, you know, beat me up kind of thing. But it's like, the worst that happens, you just end the experience. Or at least for me, I just think about my physical body and poof, I'm back in it. So there have been some, you know, and over 40 years, I've only had really a handful, I'd say less than 10 experiences where I felt unsafe. For the most part, they tend to be very thrilling, if you will. They tend to be very exhilarating. I always come back. Some people say that they come back from an OBE and they feel drained and their energy takes so much energy. For me, that's nonsense. I come back to my physical body and I'm like hyped. I'm charged. I'm like really charged up for the whole day. So it's just the opposite for me. So I think it has to do with mindset and all of that. But I haven't really found any dangers out there other than you might, like I did, have a crisis of belief. You might lose ignorance. You might start to see a side of life that you never imagined would be out there. You might lose your religion, as REM would say, or whatever. You might find yourself questioning your beliefs. You might find yourself at odds with your loved ones, your parents, your wife, your kids, whatever. They might call you crazy. I caution people talking about their out-of-body experiences unless they know somebody really is open-minded to the idea. I've talked to many people who've looked at me like I had lost my mind, or that they thought I had finally gone over the edge or something like that. But I assure you, you know, as a computer guy, it's had no adverse effect on me physically or mentally. My brain is still very sharp. I'm still a very sharp computer guy, doing one of the most complex jobs imaginable in computers. I work on the GFS2 file system of the Linux kernel, which is the most complex piece of code I've ever known. And
you know,
so
Bob,
anyway,
I took 2 coding classes in college, and it was I didn't do it again.
it's not for everybody.
Yeah, it's tough.
My point is that I've never had a problem. Some people get scared. I mean, it's, you know, sure, you can get scared. I mean, a lot of people experience sleep paralysis, which is also associated with OBEs. And in sleep paralysis, you're kind of halfway between the physical world and the non-physical, and you can easily manufacture demons and witches and hags and, you know, all kinds of unsavory creatures that, you know, they call him the Hat Man. A guy wearing a black hat that you can't really see quite well. You can't see his eyes and all of this stuff. I mean, it's easy to hallucinate monsters when you're in sleep paralysis, for example, but no harm has ever come to anyone, to my knowledge, from any of that. It's all nonsense. It's all can be disregarded. It's all a fear trap. And because fear is a big barrier to OBEs. And once you learn to get beyond that fear, your OBEs will open up and it'll be amazing. But until you learn to get beyond that fear, it can be difficult. It can be real scary.
Where do you think a good place for people to start, at least direct their attention to a place where they can start if they're interested in trying to, have an out-of-body experience themselves?
Well, I'd say do your research. There are a lot of good books on it. There's a lot of bad books on it. I've done for the past 8 years on my blog, I've been doing out-of-body experience book reviews. And so before you buy any books on OBEs, I would recommend you go out to my blog. I've got an index on my website, and you can look at the blog, the book reviews, and say, oh, here a book by Aaron Pavlina. Is Aaron Pavlina's book any good? Well, let's read Bob Peterson's book review of that book. Mm-hmm. And I give you my honest opinion of good, bad, or ugly. And I give a star rating, 1 star to 5 stars. And some of them are fantastic, some of them not so much. And so books are a good source of information. There's a lot of information out on the web. Like I said, my website is robertpeterson.org, and I've got all kinds of free information out there, including the entire text of my first book. That's my first book.
Yeah, promote it.
Body experiences, how to have them, and what to expect. So I've got the entire text of that on my website. It's been there since before its publication, so for more than 20 years. It's been on my website for free to prove it that I'm not in it for the money. I'm here to get the information out there. And I've got also on the website, I've got links to my blog, which is a free blog again, where I've got all kinds of articles on, what to do when the vibrations hit you, how to contact dead people. If you want to contact a dead loved one, here's what you do, that kind of thing. Lots and lots and lots of articles out there. Like I said, I try to publish an article on my blog about every 2 weeks. And I've been doing that for 8 years, not every 2 weeks, but pretty much. I usually skip a week or two in the summer when things get busy. But yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I loved about your blog, Bob, is that it has a lot of different things, not only book reviews, but like tips, tricks, and it's very interesting read for sure.
Well,
super helpful.
Thank you. I'm glad you're finding it useful. I've got techniques out there too. I've got explanations of different techniques that I've used in the past and that. And if it gets people going and in that direction, that's good. That's more power to them. And I'm always open to ideas for new blog articles, because now I've gotten to the point where I'm kind of running out of ideas on new articles. Yeah. I know people want to hear about this and that and the other thing, but a lot of people come into it and they have the same questions. I've got a frequently asked question, for example, a fact out on one of my articles on the blog. And I've got, hundreds of questions that people have come to me over the years with, and I've answered them and things like that. But do the research, and I encourage people to go out and try it for themselves. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anyone's word for it, but do the research and do the homework, because it's, like I said, for me at least, it's not an easy thing to achieve. It takes a lot of discipline and practice, but it's definitely worth it. It's like one of the most thrilling things that I think you can do.
One of my last questions is, if someone does have this out-of-body experience, do you have like a recommended thing they should try doing, or a place they should try going, or an experience they should try having while they're out there?
Not really. I mean, everything. I mean, there's just unlimited potential, right? I think that humankind, all of our beliefs on the afterlife, right? If you look at Christian beliefs in heaven and angels and things like that, all of those beliefs in the afterlife are based on someone's experience. Now, maybe that someone was a couple thousand years ago, but it was still someone's experience of an afterlife, right? And it might have been a near-death experience or an OBE from a near-death experience or whatever. And it might have been from an out-of-body experience, but they got that information from this universal experience. I mean, OBEs are a universal human experience. They've been recorded throughout history. to all cultures, all belief systems. And I'd love it if we could, as a race, as a human race, if we could learn to experience this, figure out what this afterlife thing really is, we could come to some kind of agreement. Think of how that would change the world, right? Think of how that would,
awesome.
it would end all of these wars of, Islam is greater than Christianity, or Christianity is greater than Buddhism, or Buddhism is greater than Hinduism, whatever.
Yeah.
Let's see what's really out there. Let's study it. Let's study it scientifically. Find out what's really there. Let's, this is 2020. This is the modern age. Let's apply science to this problem, and let's explore it. Part of the problem is there aren't enough scientists out there with the guts to actually explore this topic.
Right.
We got Charles Tart, who I mentioned earlier. He's one of my heroes. He wrote the foreword to my first book. You've got, a bunch of, just a very few, Gary Schwartz is one of them, just a very few set of scientists. Rupert Sheldrake, I love his work, but we need more scientists that think along those lines, that take this stuff seriously, and explore it and try and figure out what it really is and what's going on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree.
Bob, how many books have you written, for one? What's your latest book, and where can you find it?
I've written 5 books. I can show them to you.
Yeah.
My first book was Out-of-Body Experiences, How to Have Them and What to Expect. And that's basically, half of it is the story of how I got into OBEs and what I encountered, what I found there. And it also has, at the end of every chapter, it has exercises of how to do it yourself. Things that you can try.
Cool.
And the other half of the book is basically what the books didn't tell me, right? Things about, how your eyesight works over there in an out of body, and weird things like that other books don't want to tell you. My second book was called Lessons Out of the Body, and it basically is more spiritual. The first book was more scientific. It's like, it was kind of like Monroe's book, right? It's kind of like, this is what I experienced and this is what I found out, and it's very regimented and scientific about it. But the second book, Lessons Out of the Body, is more, first of all, it's hard to find because it's out of print, but it's more spiritual. Where can it take us? What can we learn spiritually from this experience? And the third book, I wrote a novel called The Gospel According to Mike, which is just a fun concept. My fourth book is called Answers Within. And basically in my first book, I talk about a phenomenon that I refer to as my inner voice. And that's where I started learning to communicate with my subconscious, basically, and having these dialogues with my subconscious. And there's nothing esoteric or whatever, but there's a lot of good information. A lot of people came to me after the first book's publication and asked me, well, how do I contact my inner voice? So I wrote this book to address that, because it's something that's complex, and I didn't want to shortchange it, because I don't want people misusing that stuff and talking themselves into schizophrenia or having mental problems because of it. So this is more of a solid scientific approach to learning to communicate with your subconscious. And then my latest book is Hacking the Out-of-Body Experience, Leveraging Science to Induce OBEs. And it's all about the science of inducing OBEs. Front to back, it's 358 pages of nothing but out-of-body techniques, tips, and ways to get you there. So there's no fluff, there's no experiences. Unlike my first book, where I have a lot of experiences, I narrate what happened to me. In Hacking the Out-of-Body Experience, there are no personal stories. It's all about how to get to an out-of-body experience yourself by doing things like, and neuroplasticity, leveraging neuroplasticity and diet and supplements and, just a little of everything, the different techniques. I've got tons and tons of techniques in there and tips and all of that. And you can get it on Amazon.com.
Hell yeah.
Okay, and what's your website again? We'll have a link for it, but.
Yeah, my website is robertpeterson.org.
Okay.
Sweet.
Go check it out.
Great. Well, thanks
Well-
guys for having me on.
Yeah,
This
thank
has
you so
been great.
much. This was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bob. Super informative.
Yeah.
I'm glad I could help. And look forward to watching some of your other podcasts.
Thank you.
All
Yeah.
right.
We'll have to talk again too, because I do want to explore this inner voice thing a little bit deeper, I think.
I want to be there for it too.
Very, very
'cause
curious about that. So
Well, maybe we'll have to do another episode.
yeah, I, think
I
that
would be okay
great.
with that. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Sounds
Well,
good.
thanks everybody.
Yep.
Have
Thanks,
a
Bob,
great
again.
day.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.